More than 70 years after she became the last woman to be executed here in the UK, Ruth Ellis has been granted a conditional pardon by the King. The 29-year-old was hanged at London's Holloway prison back in 1955 for the murder of her lover, David Blakely. Her case has attracted attention for decades, inspiring films and documentaries and a recent drama series, with campaigners fighting for her to be seen as a victim of both physical and emotional domestic abuse. Well, joining me now is Ruth's granddaughter, Laura Enston, and Grace Houghton from Mishcon de Reya, the law firm representing the family, which has a long association with the case. Thank you both for joining us here on the UK Tonight. Grace, tell me what this means to you and how long it's taken to get to this point.
So I think it means the world to our firm, and also it's been such an honour to act for the family of Ruth Ellis. Obviously, Victor Mishcon, he sought to secure a last-minute reprieve for Ruth Ellis at the 11th hour and was unsuccessful. And so it's just an honour that we've been able to try to finish that job of Victor Mishcon. And I think he'd be really proud of us today, and he would just be so thrilled that we've been able to secure justice for Ruth Ellis, even though it's 70 years too late.
And I'll come back to what conditional means in a minute, because I think you're the best person to explain that for us. But Laura, to you, playing devil's advocate a little bit here, people will say, look, 71 years after, why does it matter? But I know it matters to you because of the effect it's had on generations of your family.
100%. You know, the ripple effect is still being felt today. And I think, you know, the why now question is ultimately, as a society, we have a much better understanding about the long-term impact of domestic abuse and coercive control. And, you know, ultimately, I think we're ready to have that conversation. You know, 5-10 years ago, you know, and definitely not in 1955, did we recognise, you know, the impact and ultimately what Ruth had gone through. You know, she had been abused by every significant man in her life. It started with her father, then her husband, and then David Blakely. You know, just at the time of the shooting, she'd just suffered a miscarriage. She'd been badly beaten. And all this evidence was there. It was all in the archives. It was all there. But ultimately, there was no appetite to save her. And ultimately, you know, this cast a long shadow over my family. You know, when Ruth died, you know, she had 2 children, and my uncle who was 10 and my mother who was 3. And, you know, you can't even begin to imagine what those 2 children must have gone through. And ultimately, you know, those 2 led, you know, I think, you know, when that death sentence was handed out, the clock was started on their lives too. You know, my uncle took his life. My mum led a life of chaos. She died when she was 50. And, you know, she was... I think now, through a sort of a modern-day lens, we understand actually my mum didn't have the capacity to be the mother that, you know, that we needed her to be.
I'm really sad to hear that, because you end up being a victim in all this as well through nothing you've done, nothing your mother or uncle did either. And it's interesting, this point, Laura, isn't it? Seeing it retrospectively with modern eyes made all the difference, in the same way that we now understand things like generational trauma being passed down as well.
Absolutely. You know, when you look at how Ruth behaved on the stand in 1955, you know, she was very cold, very shut down, ultimately playing up to that sort of cold-blooded killer narrative that was trying to be, you know, created to justify her execution. You look at her now through a modern-day lens and how she behaved. Ultimately, a woman who was not fit to stand trial. You know, she was a very, very traumatized woman.
Grace, back to you. Look, you don't need me to tell you people have certain ideas about lawyers, just like they do with journalists. But with Mishcon in particular, was it something that the firm felt it needed to keep pushing at, given that long history with the family? Absolutely.
And as soon as we were instructed on this case, it really was, it brought home to us just how important this case was, not only to Ruth's family, and obviously Laura's spoken so eloquently about how important it is to her family, but also for all domestic abuse survivors that have been failed by the courts and the court systems in 1955, before 1955, and still today. We still see failings, and I think this case has been a monumental case, and it's been a symbolic case, and the achievements that we've managed to get to today has been essentially a vindication of all of those domestic abuse survivors as well. So it's not just about one woman 70 years ago. It goes much, much further.
What, though, is a conditional pardon. Why are the conditions attached to this?
So a conditional pardon essentially targets the sentence. It does not target the conviction. So Ruth's conviction for murder is untouched. That was the subject of a Court of Appeal hearing in 2003, which was ultimately unsuccessful because the courts are constrained in what they can consider. So they could only consider whether the conviction was unsafe, as it was in 1955, applying the laws of 1955. A conditional pardon is an acknowledgement that the death sentence should not have been imposed on Ruth, and it essentially commutes that death sentence and substitutes it for a lower sentence, which in this case, as David Lammy said in Parliament today, would have been life imprisonment or less.
Laura, final question. Are you satisfied now? Because given what you said, you believe she was entirely innocent. So, yes, it's something, but it would have been a life sentence if she was still alive.
100%. But, if this crime happened today, it would have, she would have been probably found guilty of manslaughter and served a relatively short prison sentence based on all the facts that, we have now got our access to.
Really good to have you with us this evening. Fascinating to talk to you both, and we really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.